Welcome to the Stories of School Leadership podcast, the podcast where we elevate the voices of and create connections between inspirational leaders from the UK and around the world. I'm Emma Lurie, and thank you for joining me as I share these journeys, inspirations, and stories of education, leadership, and life.
In this episode, I'm joined by Andy Downing, who is a senior leader in education and almost retired. He's director of Downing Educational Associates and brings a vast experience of leadership across schools and authorities, spanning over 50 years. And we talk about the connection that we make with young people and how amazing that is when that carries on for several decades. And we talk a lot about people and how important it is to win people over, that people-centred approach. We explore the current situation in education, and Andy shares some really insightful thoughts about how important it is to have a varied approach to curriculum strategy and other elements of the sector, where we're sitting sometimes in a one size does definitely not fit all place to be. So I hope you enjoy this exploration of Andy's journey in education. Let's get going. Andy, it's so brilliant to have you with us. Thank you so much for giving up a little bit of your time. So just to get started, can you tell me who you are and where you're from?
Hi, I'm Andy Downing. I'm people keep asking me if I'm retired. I hate the word retire because I think if you're retired, you don't get a day off. I've been 51 years working in education, and I'm still working, but a lot less now in a consultancy capacity, having been in a vast number of roles over that last 50 years.
But yes, we'll get into not all of them probably, but some of them. And where are you in the world?
In the world, I'm in the glorious Forest of Dean in Gloucestershire, not far from the River Wye and only about 15 miles from the Welsh border.
Amazing. Okay, well, I always really like, because I'm nosy, as I mentioned before I started the recording, I really like to hear about people's own education, what it was like for you at school, whether you loved it, hated it, whether it impacted, I guess, a little bit on your later decisions to go into education.
Okay, well, if I drag my mind back 67 years, St Mary's Infant School in Bury St Edmunds in Suffolk. Just two things I can remember, and that's little camp beds that would come out in the afternoon for a nap. Oh yeah.
We need to reinstate that. That's a good idea.
Yes. I noticed. I've seen some clips on YouTube of Chinese schools apparently have enforced sleeping. And the other thing that I remember from that infant school was mini blackboards. Now they're about an A4 size, if I recall. You had a blackboard and chalk for practicing your writing. And it just makes me smile when I see that secondary schools have just discovered mini whiteboards. I mean, goodness me, come on, keep up, folks. That was infant school. I then moved on to junior school, where my father was the head teacher, and then grammar school, where I was following three elder brothers. So it felt like the period of time from 7 to 18 was heavily family influenced. Being known for a large part of secondary schooling as, oh, you're Downing's brother. And your whole existence was either you're the head son or you're somebody's brother. But grammar school, it wasn't particularly enjoyable time. Well, not that I disliked it, but I was more interested in discovering rugby, girls, and beer, I think, than I was really. And you said, did it influence how I've been in education, and the answer is definitely yes, because I have actually said I have said to the old alumni that one of my reasons for being in education is to try and make sure that other youngsters have a better educational experience than I did. And I think, if to sum up why I don't particularly like it, I think it was direct instruction at its worst. It was just simply being fed loads of stuff, particularly after GCSE, I've got GCSEs that I know nothing about physics, but I've got a physics GCSE, for goodness sake. I mean, it's bonkers. I think there was a little more discourse at A level, but yeah, no, I didn't find the educational experience, the social experience, yes, great, but not the educational experience wasn't particularly satisfactory.
I guess that's part, really, if we focus on it as a whole, the social part is a huge part of, and it should be. We need to focus on that a bit more. That's a really great part of
Yes,
being
but
educated, isn't it? But
yeah,
it's
but
not how we focus on it.
but I don't think that rates very highly in terms of the way that some people are running their schools at the moment. I've got to be careful. I mustn't be critical,
But we can be honest. That's the point.
and we can be honest. We can be.
Yeah, I think it's important to be.
Yeah.
And so, did having a head teacher as your father, did that influence your going into education as a career in either way?
Yes, both ways actually, both ways. I was adamant that I didn't want to go into teaching. It was absolutely. My father was a teacher. My mother died when I was very young, and my father remarried a teacher. My brother was a teacher. I'd said, I think throughout my sort of latter part of secondary career, whatever I do, I don't want to go into teaching. I adopted a rather lazy approach at A level. 3 older brothers had all got into Nottingham University, and they all got in on the basis of 2 A level acceptance results, even though they did 3. And I thought, well, this is a bit silly, isn't it? Why would you do 3 if you only need 2 to get in? So I did 2, and of course I didn't get an offer, did I? And I was determined that I was going to take a year out and travel. And father was a very wily old man, very, very wise, and he wasn't assertive, but he was influential. And he knew that I was interested in looking at doing some sort of sociology, psychology study. And he said one day, well, I happen to know somebody who is a governor at Keswick Hall College of Education in Norwich, and they offer a sociology psychology course. I mean, you could always apply. You wouldn't need to go. And so I thought, keep the old man happy. So I put in an application, and then I got invited for interview. And he said, well, you can go for the interview. I mean, you don't need to go there.
I like his approach.
Yeah. So I went to this interview. Now, you need to know that the context of Keswick Hall at the time was that it was only 3 years earlier that it was an all-girls college, and they just introduced men, and they were very keen to get men in. So I can remember the interview with 3 of the tutors, looked like Mr. Chips, and it was tweed jackets with patches on the elbows, and a lady in a twin suit with pearls. I mean, nothing wrong with twin suits and pearls. And the first question was, well, Andrew, I was known as Andrew before I got to college. Well, Andrew, why do you want to be a teacher? And I said, well, I don't want to be a teacher. I want to do, if anything, I want to do youth work or perhaps social work. And there was a sort of moment's pause in the room. And then one of them said, well, that's fantastic. I think that's great. Yes, that would be wonderful. So I actually drifted myself into College of Education on the pretense that I had no intention of being a teacher, and had a great couple of first terms. Really enjoyed it. Wonderful social life. Yeah, the sociology, psychology was it was good. It was very engaging. But it wasn't until first practice that changed everything. I think first practice was just, actually, I like this. And there we go. That's how I fell into education, I think we would say.
I hear a lot of people say, no, I didn't want to do that. I wanted to be a physiotherapist. And then I found out I had to do science and I was rubbish at science. So I thought, right, I need a different plan. Yeah, lots of people, or maybe they had sort of careers advisors who were like, no, don't do that.
Yes.
Go into education. It was different.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
so what happened then as you were having kind of after your training, it's kind of first
I
few
came,
jobs?
well, yeah, I came out of college, having acquired not only a certificate in education, but also a wife and a baby, and went in my first job in a primary school in Alton Broad in Suffolk. And it was, looking back on it, I mean, I just think how weird it was. I was given, it was one of these terrapin type classrooms. I don't know if they could call them terrapin, but it was a temporary classroom in the yard that had already been there for 17 years as a temporary classroom. And I was given a pile of old, I won't call them maths books, they were arithmetic books basically, and a pile of some sort of reading scheme, pretty random. And that was it. I was just left to get on. And every now and then the head would come over and walk into the class. And then at some point later would say, hey, you're doing really well, aren't you? And I'm thinking, what am I doing that really well? But I did have a very significant 4 years there. I think because of the relationships that I built with those kids, and particularly because the very first class that I had them again 3 years later as the top class, and so that was 51 years ago. And in September, I went out to dinner with 13 of them from that class.
Oh,
That's
that's amazing.
That's pretty special.
How did that come about? Who organized that?
Oh, somebody spotted a photograph of me. I think one of them posted an old school photograph, class photograph, on Facebook, and it was picked up by somebody that I played rugby with in the area, who messaged me and said, that was you in that picture, wasn't it? And from that, the number of them just made contact with me, and we built this contact up. And the first time that we all met up was sort of 4 years ago or something. And then they said, oh, we need to do it again. And I said, well, it would happen to be the 50th anniversary last year. And so I met up with them, and well, it was incredibly special. And I have a pewter tankard now that's Mr. D 50 years on or something.
And did they retell lots of stories about?
Oh, hell yes.
Oh, but that's the difference that individuals make in the sector, isn't it? It's when you're in that tough bit, thinking actually in however many years' time, these people will be adults and they will still remember you and the difference that you made in their lives. It's amazing.
I treasure that. I treasure that very dearly. Yeah, and it was kind of, it also felt incredibly fitting that that having been the first class that I taught, they and I left the school at the same time. And I'd been very taken by the 9 to 13 middle school sector. My brother was working in the 9 to 13 middle school sector, and so I decided that I wanted to get in there. But also after 4 years and with a young family, I kind of needed to think about advancing career-wise. So I was in a catch-22 that each time I applied for a job in a middle school, I was told the problem is you haven't got any experience in a middle school. And then came across a Service Children's Education Authority, who were running middle schools in Germany mainly, and applied and went for 6 pretty phenomenal years out in Germany, in a place called Fallingbostel near Hamburg, and then down in Osnabrück. And that was one of the first, that was the first significant professional development of my career, I think, because I've always said that it's not courses or books that have influenced me, it's people. It's people that I have worked with, either positively or negatively. And I worked with a head teacher over there who was the first time I really understood what being a professional was, I think. And he had a very significant influence on me. And he obviously had a lot of faith in me, because he made me a subject leader and a year leader, and so that was kind of my entree, I suppose, into leadership.
So then how did you get into the sort of the senior leadership? And then I know I'm really keen to talk about some of the school improvement support that you've done as well over the time. So what was that next little bit?
Okay, I came back to a large deputy headship in Newmarket, deputy headship in middle school. Stayed there for about 7 years and got on the headship recruitment circuit. I was still pretty young then. I was still only 30. Or just into my 30s, and I had, oh goodness knows how many interviews, and I kept coming, just almost ran. I remember the chief education officer at the time, who was involved in all the interviews, Duncan Graham, who went on to lead the National Curriculum Council. I remember him saying, "God, boy, you're going to get one soon," and as if he was worried that I was. I think he thought I was probably too young. And I didn't get one because a job came up that was within the school improvement service, which was actually head teacher equivalent, but it was managing professional development out of a teacher's centre and managing the allocation of school-based inset funding. And so I sidestepped headship at that point, although from a salary point of view, status point of view, or whatever, I was in the equivalent position. I think that was the very best thing that could have happened to me. It would have been, I think it would have been awful. I would have been a head teacher, as I suppose everybody is, based on the experience that I had, which was limited. And yes, a lot of people would have done this exactly that route. But I look back at it now and realize how much I didn't know. And I would have gone in and run a school based on an ideology that I held at the time about how schools should be run, without having that broad understanding of how schools could be run. And so I spent quite a long time in that role, and till I got the job as middle school advisor for Northumberland. And I went up to Northumberland absolutely committed to the middle school sector, and left Northumberland about 4 years later, I think it was, thinking, no, they're dinosaurs. It's not really a place for them. And at that time, I think that I felt that staying in local authority work was probably the place I wanted to be, because although I really enjoyed my teaching, what I was finding was that I actually got as much, perhaps more of a buzz about working with adults and about influencing adults and helping adults to develop. And I was asked to go and be the chief advisor on an interim basis in South Tyneside for, it was about 6 months, I think, that I did there, which was a challenging position to be in. The first interim position that I was in, completely different set of skills, I suppose, that you've got to very quickly assess where somewhere is, and recognizing that you are only there for a limited period of time. you can't go in with the view that you are going to run this place in the way that necessarily you would be choosing to run it if you were the substantive post holder, but with a very clear remit that you've got to deliver outcomes and deliver results. And at that time, I was really fortunate to come across a new strategic education service that Capita, the outsourcing company, had just formed, called Capita Strategic Education Services, run by Ian Harrison and Parin Bal, who just come out of Newham Local Authority. And it was a small team. There were only about, probably when I joined, maybe a dozen, not much more. And it was very much set up with a view to, initially at least, working in some of those authorities where the government had in some way intervened, the DfE had intervened. So my first contract was the London Borough of Haringey, who had just been basically had intervention foisted upon them. And so a team of us, I was told that I would probably be in there for maybe 3, 6. I think I left 3 years later. I was sort of an assistant director position. That was such a galvanizing process, I suppose, in shaping me, because I was going into an environment that I'd never worked in a place like Haringey before, with the diversity and the deprivation. And yet there were some things that you could see that were generically needed to be put in place in terms of school improvement. And so developing a proper monitoring system across the schools, developing proper performance management processes within the local authority. And I think it was probably during that time that it really struck home to me that if you're in any position within education, you can learn a curriculum, pedagogy, assessment. They're, I'm going to be a bit trite now, but say in a way they're the easy things, because you can learn them. The really hard stuff is people, and it's leading people and managing people and supporting people and winning people over. And if you can imagine a situation where this team of us, and there were probably only about half a dozen of us, I think it was something like half a dozen, it may be less. We've been foisted onto this local authority, and understandably, there was tension, there was resistance, and pretty pointless going in and laying down the law and shouting loudly and issuing instructions and edicts and so on. We couldn't achieve anything unless we could bring those people on board. And that, I think, was perhaps one of the biggest points of learning for me. And I think that what has most strongly influenced my way of working going forward. That very much about winning people round. Yes, of course, you have to give hard messages. You know, somebody's going to listen to this and say, oh, he's just a softie, and just go along with what people say. Well, ask one or two of those who have found other options. But at the end of the day, you have to be able to work with the people that you've got, the people, let's face it, the people who most know the context, the people who most understand the context. And from there, I went through a whole raft of interim positions, being, interim assistant director in Southend, in Northamptonshire, doing school improvement consultancy posts in places like Lewisham and Barnsley and so on. And the same thing applies all the time. I think you've got to very quickly go in and assess the place, assess where the strengths and weaknesses are, where are the people who are most on board with you, where are the people who are going to be the most resistant, and generally they're the ones that I want to work with, because they're the ones that I want to bring around. And I think that I can, with a degree of honesty, say that I was pretty successful in that regard. Only say that because the number of times that people have said to me, either when I'm some weeks or months in, or towards the end of a project, well, we weren't sure about you at all, and we thought, what the hell is this guy being foisted on us? Actually, you've really helped to shape us and left us in a better position. And when I've done those sort of roles, I've always believed that my objective must be to build capacity rather than add capacity.
That's a really
no good me going in and fixing things, or me going in and having the influence directly on school. I need to go in to build the capacity within the organization, so that actually when I'm walking away, the organization is left in a better position than it was when I went in.
Yes. You've touched on so many big kind of ideas and thinking there. One bit I'd really like to explore a bit more, because it resonated with me before we started recording. I shared that I did an interim, just a short acting position just before Christmas. And I found it completely different to the things I'd done before, the jobs I'd had before, where this is your job, you're going to be doing this for however many years in the future. So you hit the nail on the head to go in and know you're only there for a short amount of time. The way that you have to reflect on things, make decisions, as you said, be quite quick in some of that relationship building. And what I sort of didn't know maybe until I started thinking about interim positions and understanding a bit more, is that some people make choices to just do interim positions. And you're certainly, the things that you've done are that's been many years of your career of taking those, and I'm assuming they were a choice to take those interim positions and not wanting to stay in those for necessarily a really long time, or because of the nature of the work, it's kind of you're in and out.
Yeah, I mean, I did that for goodness knows. I'm trying to think how long I did it for, from 2001 to about 8 years, I suppose. And during that time, because Capita was running the national strategy, so I went and spent a period of time as a senior school improvement officer for Yorkshire and Humberside and strategies. And there did come a point in, I think it was about 2009 or something like that, when I thought, hang on, I think perhaps I do want to look at something substantive. Perhaps I do want to go. And that was when I applied for the director of schools for Nottingham City. And I went there for a couple of years, but it was quite a brief. Yeah, it was quite a brief period, because I probably took it a little bit later than I should have done. I was well into 50s. It was extremely pressured, and it was pressured. I'm not going to say too much about why it was pressured. I worked for probably the best boss that I've ever worked for, in Ian Currier, who was absolutely incredible. 10 years younger than me. And why do I mention that? Well, I only mention that because what the hell difference does it make, I suppose, really. He was the most incredible leader who had come a very unusual route from being primary head teacher in the city, all the way through to being the director of children's services, and went on to be the chief executive. But there were pressures that came from other sources, which I just found were going to, I thought, they were going to cause me possible health issues. I think so. So I did it for about 2.5 years, and that was it. Don't regret it. I don't regret it at all. But I then decided I took a bit of a break, and then went back to doing working independently as a part of my own company, doing some interim school improvement advisory work. Haven't mentioned the headship yet, have we, Emma?
Oh,
I was on that head teacher circuit at 30. I actually took my first headship at 60. That's possibly unusual. And that was because I was doing some advisory work in an authority, and worked with a school for some while. And local authority said, there's a vacancy there that needs filling, and would you be prepared to take it for a year? An unusual school, a Sikh faith school. I said, be an interesting one. I'll go and talk to the governors. And I said, look, we have one issue here, that probably, don't we? You're a Sikh faith school with a Gurdwara attached to the school, and I'm not a Sikh. I'd worked with that school for a year in an advisory capacity. They knew me quite well, and they said, that's absolutely fine. We won't expect you to know all the doctrine, provided you don't in any way deliberately contravene any of our sort of ethics and principles. So a very unusual situation to go into your first headship at 60 and do that for a year.
You mentioned, didn't you, before, about how you, looking back, know that you sort of said taking those interim roles and doing that school improvement gave you such a breadth of knowledge, and had you stepped straight into headship, which many of us do, you're going in sometimes a bit blind, and by taking that other route, you must have brought so much knowledge to that.
Well, I said to you earlier on that had I got one of those headships when I was doing the rounds of the recruitment circuit at 30, I would have been a bit of a disaster. As it was, I went into this, I was going to say, with a good deal of confidence, and I think that probably is true. I think that I don't mean that I thought, oh, this will be a piece of cake. I think it was that I had enough breadth of perspective, breadth of understanding of how schools operate and how people operate, that I wasn't feeling that it was going to faze me. I mean, it was an extraordinarily challenging year for reasons that were nothing to do with teaching and learning or the organisation of the school, or external factors related to the school, meant that it was an enormously challenging year. And I think that one of the proudest things there was that, again, I'd said to them, part of what I do has got to be to build capacity, and the number of the very young leaders that we had in the school, who I was I think able to grow and develop and see them go elsewhere.
Yeah. And I completely resonate with that building capacity element, because if we think about the sector at the moment, we are in really challenging times. We've got lots of heads who are making the decision to step out, to alter their, perspectives. And so we've always needed to build capacity, but now more than ever, that's so important. We need to make sure we've got part of the retention and recruitment, but people who are wanting to step into those roles.
And what worries me considerably at the moment is that I am not convinced that trusts or schools are truly growing leaders. I'm finding that I will go into a number of situations where I come across people who are referred to as leaders, but they're not leaders because they're not allowed to be leaders, because they are working to a template. They are being, I think about it as leading by numbers. They are told, you know, this is the monitoring schedule. This is how you will do your monitoring. This is how you will record your monitoring. This is how you will report your monitoring. This is what a scheme of work will look like. Even getting worse than that, this is what a lesson plan will look like. You know, we have got schools that are down to that level. That is not building professionals. That is not building autonomous professionals with agency. And I find that, you know, I'm quite often I'm asked to do coaching in schools, and it's often with middle as well as senior leaders. And the first thing that I discover very often is that I'm working with somebody who is called, I don't know, Key Stage 2 leader or maths leader or whatever. And you realize that actually they're not actually allowed to lead, because what they're allowed to do is to do what they're told to do by the hierarchy.
Yeah.
And linked to that, I think we have got an enormous number of people who are being promoted very early. Now, I would not recommend to anybody that they take their first headship at 60. I think that's pretty bonkers, really, as an idea. I was very pleased I did it, but you know, I was at the end of my career when actually, as now, I the work I do, I don't do because I need to do. I do the work because I enjoy doing it. But I think we've got people who are being promoted very young, who have very limited experience, both in terms of exposure to a range of ways of doing things, but also having been corralled by hierarchies to work in a certain way, and they merely perpetuate that principle. And that does worry me rather. You know, I've always taken the
idea, isn't it?
I've always taken the Steve Jobs approach. Now, it was Steve Jobs, the guy who developed Apple, who said, "We don't appoint good people to tell them what to do. We appoint good people so that they can tell us what needs to be done." And I've always made that a principle of how I work with other people. To say, look, you're the leader of maths, and I'm actually not a maths specialist. Now, don't bring me the problem. Bring me a range of solutions. If you're not sure, come with, this is what we could do. This is what I think would make the difference. Rather than me saying, right, what you need to do is X, Y, and Z.
Yes. And you're some really interesting points there, because I am one of those people who got absolutely thrown into leadership. I was 29 when I was made head teacher, with really limited teaching experience. And while there is so much I hadn't experienced, what I did have was a lot of autonomy. And so I was young with a young team, but it wasn't as structured then. And the things you were saying, I thought, oh, I completely can see what you're saying. I see it in lots of schools. You know, you nailed it with some of that explanation of what it's like. But what we had was lots of autonomy to do and to be innovative and give it a try. And we built a really incredible curriculum. But you know, each step you take, you learn more and more. So I think it's a mixture, isn't it? I think the two things there are probably around, if you're going to be young going into it, what support is there for you to develop? Because, okay, I think you can be really young and really great and innovative.
So do I.
but you need to not be told exactly how to do it. You need that autonomy to bring yourself to it, and the support and the drivers around it. And I think you're right, we've not always got that right.
Come on, Emma, let's use the word supervision. Whatever
Coaching, supervision,
I was going to
support.
say, you know, I think that there should be an entitlement for at least head teacher, not more than entitlement, an entitlement and an expectation that a head teacher will have, call it what you like, coach, supervisor, mentor, guru, but somebody who is not integral to the organization, who they can share their leadership journey with and can talk things through. Not somebody who is going to tell them what to do, but somebody who is going to help them to work through the challenges and possibilities in a safe environment.
Yes, wholeheartedly agree with that. And giving, I think the external element is really important, because that, I'd love to hear in a minute your kind of idea and thoughts as you've explored and I guess seen the growth of multi-academy trusts and what that looks like in across the country, because that's certainly something in my leadership career to date that has grown. So I started with a lot of autonomy in a multi-academy trust that was starting, and what naturally happened as I grew in that leadership and as the trust grew was that the autonomy lessened. It got more structured. We became more like each other as schools, because that was seen to be easy if we do it the same way, if we have the same templates, simpler for people to, you know, compare across data, for example. But with that comes the other side of it, that you then, you know, become robotic. You've got to do it that way. You don't seek other ways of recording your report for the governors because you're told to do it in that way.
And how do we get development? How do we get leadership development if people are only confined to doing things in a way that they have been told by others that they're going to do it? You know, we will just end up with a sort of totally aligned mass. And the thing that worries me, I am currently the chair of a small multi-academy trust, and we're very much on the autonomy end of the autonomy alignment spectrum. What worries me, I think, is about the multi-academy trust system is the accountability. I think, and people will say to me, well, of course, schools are accountable to Ofsted, and the schools are accountable to the trust board. My retort to that is, but who are the trust boards accountable to? They don't seem to be accountable particularly to parents. They're certainly not accountable to local communities. And I'm not going to cite any of the practice that I think is appalling, because it will be so easy to attribute it to certain trusts. I see some horrendous practice being trailed on social media, and it doesn't seem there's any mechanism for actually safeguarding against that. I don't in any way have an objection to the multi-academy trust system, but I do to the way that it is being allowed to be, in certain areas, taken over by I was going to say charismatic individuals. I'm not sure if they're charismatic even, but some wacky individuals, I think. That's all I can say. Yeah.
It's just that business element to it, isn't, I suppose. Trusts have become so big. There's lots of positives to working that way in collaboration, but I certainly found my experience has very much been that the business side of it and the corporate elements, that I think education is such a special sector and it's different and it needs to be different. We're working with the lives of young people, I think that that corporate world is really seeped into education, and of course there's going to be benefits to that, but I think we need to really carefully manage the positives and the not so positives for that.
And I think that, for me there are two key problems. One is that I still, perhaps I'm old-fashioned, but I still believe that a school is and should be a part of a community, and therefore the school should in some ways both reflect and support and promote that community. Therefore, I don't see how a corporate style that is imposed from hundreds of miles away onto some little Devon school, how is that actually reflecting the aspirations and needs of that community? So I think that's one thing that worries me. The other thing that worries me is that education seems to be becoming very binary. And by binary, I mean that there's an awful lot of use of the word or. It's mixed ability or setting, direct instruction or inquiry. I can't remember. I'm lost now. There's a lot of things that and people adopting a position that says this is the right way. Well, I'm sorry, but how have I managed to get through 51 years in this business and I still don't see a right way? I see usually a combination of a number of different ways. I think we need to introduce the word "and" into education much more than "or." So we actually recognize that there isn't one size fits all. We need to look at different approaches, different styles for the cohort, the subject, the community, the teachers that you've got. And people are getting very, very wedded in their ways, and there's a kind of polarization of you're either one of us or you're one of them, which I find incredibly naive.
Yes. And it touches upon the idea of having conversations the other day around this idea of like complexity and wanting to control it. And actually, we can't pigeonhole it because we're dealing with people and young children, and the world is so uncertain. And actually, we need to the simple version of it. We need to recognize how complex it is, give people trust and autonomy to run it. Absolutely, schools need support, leaders need support. Finance is a nightmare. There's so many challenges, but actually, if we can give back that choice and recognition that there are many different versions and ways, how freeing would that be for so many of our leaders? Because I think that's often the struggle, is that leaders are questioning themselves because they don't think that is right, or I've had so many conversations with people going, I need to be brave to make a decision that's different to that.
I think you're hit the nail on the head. I think that there are a lot of people who are actually personally quite insecure. And because they are personally insecure in their leadership, then therefore they have to hold on to control. And I've adopted this approach, therefore I'm going to stick to it. Nobody's going to allow the system to break out of that prescribed approach. And I feel that there is a lot of misunderstanding of the difference between consistency and uniformity. And so what I see is increasing amounts of uniformity, whether it fits or not, rather than a consistency which is based on your vision and values, but that consistency will actually be manifested in different ways in different settings. Mm-hmm. So if you've got a trust that's got a school in Devon and another school in Tower Hamlets, I really don't think that it makes a lot of sense to be adopting a uniform approach. but there will be principles that will underpin across the trust's vision.
Yes. And there are some, amazing organisations out there doing really fantastic things. What I tend to feel that is the trusts or the schools that are doing those seem a bit maverick and a bit brave and different, whereas actually what they are doing is giving people that autonomy, making sensible decisions, trialing things, not following the status quo, mixing up the curriculum a little bit. And
I think they're also tend to be the ones who are making the less noise. I think that the noise seems to be coming from people who are determined that they're going to keep shouting about their chosen way because it is the only way. And they're the ones who I feel are probably a bit insecure, because if they need to keep shouting so much about these strange, bizarre processes that they're doing, why do they get so defensive when anybody questions them? Anyway,
that's often the way, though, isn't it? Those that are humble and doing great things don't always shout about it.
But let's face it, there is some incredible practice going on in our schools, some amazing practice, and going on under the most disadvantageous circumstances. And I think that I'm doing bits of work, but very little, and as I said, I don't do work because I need to do work. I do it because I enjoy it. I would hate to be in a school leadership position now. I think that the political support, the funding, the services to provide for children's mental health, for SEND, are so abysmal, and schools are really having to work almost against what is being put on around them.
Yes, it's certainly tough times.
Yeah.
So it's been amazing to speak to you. Before we finish, you've mentioned kind of coaching and supervision and that kind of support. Take into account everything that you've learned in your vast career and school improvement. Are there is there anything else that you think to turn things around, to make some big shifts? We talked about giving back autonomy, I guess, haven't we? We've talked about support for leaders. What would be your other, Andy Downing, for education secretary policies that you would put in?
Well, it probably wouldn't be educational policies. It would probably be more around economic and social care policies. I mean, the biggest barrier to education is poverty. And I've become political now, but poverty is a political choice, as simple as. And austerity, having deprived, I've got a granddaughter who has been trying to access mental health services for 7 years. It's dire. And if we only had proper support around the family, if we had economic support, we had, dare I say it, we used to have things called Sure Start centres. Apparently this government has thought it's really clever to have found childhood hubs or something, but there's hardly any of them. It's that every child matters that Michael Gove, destroyed the moment he came into power. The support around the family, medical, mental, dental, economic support. To me, those to get that kind of social fabric right would make an immense difference to schools.
Yes, I agree. That's a great place to end. Thank you so much for your time. It's been really.
I thoroughly enjoy it. You get to my age, and there's something quite nice about doing this sort of reflection and look back.
I need to get a big red book, don't I? Like, this is your life. I'll award it to people when we publish the episode.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks, Andy.
You're very welcome, Emma.
Thank you so much for listening to the Stories of School Leadership podcast. We'd love to know what inspired you in this episode, so do get in touch and tell us your thoughts. And please share this with friends and colleagues. If you have time, a review would mean so much. It really helps us to reach more people. If you'd like to connect with me to follow my journey or access some support, maybe supervision, coaching or early years consultancy, you can find me at Stories of School Leadership on Instagram. I'm Emma Lurie on LinkedIn, or my website is emmalurie.co.uk. I hope you have a great day whatever you're getting up to next, and I can't wait to share the next episode with you.